If you've ever visited my city of London and you've happened to take the tube, no doubt you'll be all too familiar with this announcement.
Look out, please.
In Italy, however, it's not so much mind the gap, but more like mind the truther. Truther in Italian translates to be fooled or scam, and there's a fair bit of it that happens in this country. It's not just tourists that are targeted, but also long-term residents. So you've got to have your wits about you and be paying attention to the things that I'm going to be sharing with you in today's video. I've been living here in the south of Italy for nearly 8 years, and some of what I talk about today are my own personal experiences, but also the experiences of people that I know here, because I want you to move here and be truly informed so that you don't end up getting ripped off. Now, let's begin with the first consideration in that, of course, this doesn't apply to every single Italian citizen. The majority of Italian citizens are hardworking, law-abiding, and they pay for the things that they need to pay for, and you can trust them. However, there are pockets of people in this country that let the rest of Italy down by not paying for goods or services, by breaching the terms of their contract, and also by trying to fleece money from people. And as a result, it has implications for the average Italian person because they end up paying the price with higher costs on insurance policies and usually stricter payment terms when it comes to paying for business services. So it does impact quite a few everyday Italians, and I can give you 3 areas in which most Italians feel this impact. The first is when it comes to car insurance. Now, Italy has one of the highest car insurance policy prices in all of Europe. And I have to be honest with you, whilst this is not entirely down to the scams that happen here, it can also be down to the high number of accidents, the theft rate, also the cities in Italy as to where you are. Some cities are deemed riskier than others. However, the scams do play a part because in the past, there were a high number of fraudulent cases of car accidents that never happened and injuries that people never received, to the point where premiums now on insurance policies are extremely high. And you can find that some Italian people end up paying upwards of €1,000 a year for a basic insurance cover on their vehicle. So it's a problem. Not only that, though, the second area where this plays out in everyday life is when it comes to renting properties. I've said it before, but landlords are incredibly nervous about letting their properties out to tenants because they've had experiences where they've let a property out, the tenant has moved in, and then they've stopped paying the rent or they've started to damage the property. And one thing you need to know is that the legal processes and court procedures in Italy are extremely lengthy and costly, which means that it can take absolutely forever for a landlord to evict a tenant from their property, and especially so if they have a young family, because that adds an extra layer of complication. So now, as a result, landlords are requiring quite hefty deposits to rent homes in Italy. Sometimes it might be as much as up to 6 months worth of deposit in advance. And then on top of that, you've still got to pay your first month's rent in advance too, which is a lot of money. If the landlord doesn't require that, they may require what is known as a bank guarantee. Now, a bank guarantee is essentially where you need to have the required deposit amount available in your bank to be frozen. And what that means is that you are not able to touch that money for the duration of your rental contract. So rental contracts, especially long-term contracts in Italy, can be up to 5 years or up to 8 years. That's a hell of a long time for your money to sit there and not be touched. Because if you default on a payment, the bank will then use that money to pay the landlord. It really is a problem that impacts a lot of Italian people because the average Italian person doesn't have that kind of money sitting about to use in this way. Now, I have to be honest, the home that we live in now is one such example of a home that we've paid probably the highest deposit that we've ever had to pay to live here because we didn't know anyone from Adam in this particular part of the province that we've moved to. So we didn't have that all-important point of connection. But also, secondly, our landlord has been stung by this problem in the past as well. So this is exactly what can happen. But it's not just the financial commitment, but you may also be subject to more stringent background checks as well. So the landlord can really be sure about who you are, especially if they do not have anybody that can vouch for you here in Italy. So that might mean, of course, checks on your income, bank checks, employment checks, maybe even character or personal references. So it's quite a difficult process, I would say, to rent a property in Italy, especially if you don't know someone here or you're not Italian. But even if you are Italian, it can still be tricky. So it's not easy. And these scams haven't made it any easier, I would say. Now, the third area that this can play out in is when you have to use businesses. If you need to enlist the services of a business, for example, what you'll find now is because businesses have had people do what is known as an abuse of contract, where they don't stick to the contract terms, they stop paying for services, whatever it may be. They now impose much stricter conditions when it comes to repayment terms, but also there's less flexibility. So where in the past you might have been able to split your payments across the year, now there's less likelihood of that happening. You may also be required to pay a heftier deposit up front before a business will start working with you. So these aspects can impact your everyday life here in Italy a lot as a result. But it's not the only thing you need to be paying attention to. The other aspect you've got to pay attention to is the sincerity of the people that you meet here in Italy. There is this age-old stereotype of Italians being friendly, kind, warm-hearted, doing anything for you. Now, as much as that is true, and I have met so many people that would absolutely fit into that character description, I would also say to you that for every person that wants to help you and give something to you, there is another person waiting who wants to fleece you and take something from you. So you've just got to always be careful and not trust everything that you are told. Not every smile is genuine, not every interaction is real. Now, I have to say as well, I think this is especially so if you don't come from Italy. Italians sometimes view people who come from other countries that they deem rich, like America, China, maybe the UK. And so they deem you like a bit of a walking banknote. And this goes for both tourists as well as long-term residents. So you've got to be careful with that, because it might mean that you end up being overcharged for services here without even realizing it. And the reason that you may not realize it is because, generally speaking, the cost of living here in Italy is relatively cheap compared to life in those countries that you've come from, for example. So you may not even consider that you are being ripped off, because if you end up paying 300, 400, 500 euros less than you would if you were paying for the same service in your country, you're going to think that you've got a steal. But the steal is not in the price. The steal is in the money they're taking from you. Because if you do your research and you speak to the locals and you start to understand the average prices, you realize that you have been ripped off by Italian standards. So this is why it pays to do your research. Not only that, but also you need to make sure that you are not being charged for extras that you simply do not need. Now, this can happen with additional add-ons. For example, if you have some work being carried out in your home, or you take out a contract and they give you extra protection add-ons or whatever it may be. But it can also play out in more like general situations, like if you go to the hairdressers, for example, and all of a sudden you're being sold extra treatments that you don't need or products that you don't want to buy. There is this kind of pressure that you can feel here sometimes. But again, it boils down to you in terms of doing your due diligence, understanding if those extra add-ons are actually mandatory or if you even really need them. And also, if you are in a situation where you're being forced treatments down your throat or things that you don't want done at the hairdressing salon, learning to say non grazie, okay? So it is this. I feel like you've got to be so careful here. But if you are dealing with businesses here in Italy, some things you need to pay attention to, particularly businesses that charge you IVA. IVA is the tax here in Italy that for most items is at 22%, but there can be some reductions depending on what it is that you're buying. Now, what you'll find is that companies will tell you the price of the item, and then in brackets, they will say plus IVA, and that is plus this 22% or slightly lower amount depending on the item. Now, a couple of things you need to know here. If a company is charging you IVA, you must receive an official invoice from that company for that service that you are requesting. It is not enough to receive an email and in the body of the email have all the details that you need. This was my experience recently, and it raised so many red flags that it inspired me to do this video, because I thought, you know what, I'm sure I'm not the only person that has fallen victim to this or nearly fallen victim to it, because I sussed this out pretty much immediately. But essentially, with any kind of invoice from these companies, it should have the header with the logo, the partita IVA number, the address, the contact details, and everything laid out officially, so you know exactly what you're paying for. Now, the reason this is important is because companies that charge you IVA are required by law to issue these invoices. Also, you have to pay attention to the fact that if you don't receive this invoice, is this company even legally allowed to charge you IVA? Because companies that charge you IVA are receiving a turnover in excess of 85,000 euros a year. Companies that are under that amount do not charge their clients IVA. And so if you don't have a proper invoice, is that extra 22% really going to IVA, or is it going into the pockets of the founder? That's what you need to be asking yourself. Now, secondly, I would say to you that in terms of payment terms, some businesses will accept like card payments, in which case you'd go through an authorized card provider. Others might ask you to do a bank transfer. If they ask you to do a bank transfer for services here in Italy, always make sure that the name on the bank account matches the name of the business. Now, there are some exceptions here when it might not be so, particularly if the business is operating as a sole trader or sole proprietor. It might just be the name of the business owner that you see. But if the business is turning over in excess of 85,000 euros and is charging you IVA, they should have the name of their business as the name of the bank account. And you should be able to correspond and correlate the two. Now, I will say that in my recent experience, this wasn't the case. So not only did I have this email, and in the body of the email, all of the details and the instructions for what to do and the payment terms and what to do next, but I noticed immediately that the name of the bank account was a completely different name to the business whose services I wanted to enlist. And not only that, it was in a completely different sector. And not only that, it was in a completely different part of Italy, because I did my research. Now, I have to be honest with you, I challenged this business about this matter, and I received the classic response, non ti preoccupare. If a business tells you non ti preoccupare, start to be worried. If they tell you this and they're charging something that seems absurd, or there's some other red flags going, run for the hills, right? Because all I got told was non ti preoccupare, basically just check the IBAN, which the bank account is correct. Absolutely not. But I have to be honest with you, it didn't stop there, because then I received a message on my phone the next day from the person who was the founder of the business and who had been sending the original emails, because another red flag was that there wasn't actually a point of contact name at the bottom of the emails, just like the logo of the company and like telephone number and so forth. But there wasn't the name of the founder, and I could understand it was the founder because somewhere on their settings, I could see on my email that it was coming from this person. Now, this very same person sent me a message by phone the next day, just following up, seeing if everything was okay and did I want to proceed, because I'd kind of done the whole Italian let's see, because I was like, I'm definitely not going to go down this road. And so I started to ask some more questions about, like, is it possible to split payment terms? Is it possible to do this, like some of the more reputable companies in a similar field allow you to? And they were like, oh no, because of the abuse of contract. And then I got the whole, but I can offer you a discount. Let me speak to my administration. The person that I was communicating with was the founder of the company. What administration do you need to speak to? You are the administration, no? Like, literally, do your research, okay? There are so many red flags sometimes with businesses. Pay attention to things like, the communication you have with them, the contact you have. I made a rookie error in saying that I spoke English and that I preferred to have communication by email so that I can read the Italian and take my time to understand it. That was a bit of a rookie error, and I think probably that is why this particular company decided to take the piss. But there we are. Pay attention, learn from my experiences. Now, I should probably say as well, like with businesses, that be very careful about doing jobs cash in hand without any receipt. Sometimes this happens here, absolutely. People pay someone to come and do a quick job in the house and it's cash in hand, no invoice, nothing. Okay, it's not legal, but it happens. However, if you're having some big work done on your house, if you're having a job that's pretty important done, make sure you have a record, an invoice, something to demonstrate that work that has been done, because you never know in the future if you have a problem or there's some kind of repercussion. You need to evidence the fact that you paid for that service, and cash in hand gives you zero kind of protection, especially without any kind of receipt or invoice. And of course, dare I say it, it's illegal. So just be really careful about that as well, because some businesses here will be like, cash in hand, we don't take card. make sure you get a receipt. Okay, really important. And on that note, actually, if you shop in a business here in Italy, make sure you take a receipt, because by law, every single shop in Italy must give you a receipt, whether you pay by cash or card. This is really important, because if you happen to be stopped by the police as you exit the shop, for example, they might ask to check your receipt. I don't know of anyone that has ever had this happen to them, but if it's happened to you, comment below and tell us. But if they check and you don't have a receipt, that business is in trouble, because essentially that money they've just taken from you, especially if it's cash, is not being declared as tax. So be careful. Now, another way that you might experience this is when it comes to rental agreements. Now, there's something for you to know, that when you sign a rental agreement for a home here in Italy, within 30 days of you signing that rental agreement, it needs to be registered with the Agenzia delle Entrate. Now, this is usually done by the landlord, and you receive a certificate to say that it's all been completed. But this is required for your residency, because when you go to register your residency at the office, they will ask to see this particular piece of paper, because essentially it means that all of the money that you pay in rent is actually going to be taxed. So, it's all legit, basically. So this is something to pay attention to, because if you don't get this done, it's very unlikely that you'll be able to register your residency here in Italy. But also when it comes to rental contracts, and it baffles me so much that this even happens, I have seen in those online expat communities on Facebook, people saying, even to this day, and not just one person, but a few different people, saying that they have been renting homes cash in hand without a contract, and now they're having some problems or whatever it may be. Who in their right mind does this? Now, I do know people here in South Italy that have done this before, and maybe in their situation, it was convenient for them to do so at the time, but it gives you zero protection. It is your word against the others, especially if you have absolutely nothing in writing. Like if one day the landlord changes their mind and puts all your stuff out on the street, what are you going to do? If one day the landlord decides to increase your rent, what are you going to do? You legally don't have any leg to stand on, because you are engaging in something that is illegal. You can report the landlord, absolutely, but then it becomes a really lengthy legal process that you needn't have undergone had you just avoided that situation in the first place. I really think that people lose their heads when they move to Italy. They get lost in the beauty of this country, the romance, the fairy tale, whatever it may be, and they believe too much the sincerity of people here, which is why you've got to be so careful. Let me tell you something. If you wouldn't do it in your own country, don't do it here. This is like the kind of foundation that you should be referring to whenever you do anything here in Italy. Would you do it in your own country? If not, why are you doing it here? Now, I will say to you that processes and things like that, when you do them legally, yes, they might differ to what you're used to in your country, but that's different because that's a legal way of doing something. But something like this, renting a home when you don't have a contract, you're paying cash in hand every month, maybe it's cheaper, maybe it's easier to do because you don't have to do all those checks that I spoke about before. It's not stable and it's not secure, and you put yourself in a really, really vulnerable position. So just don't do it. Now let's talk about work, because this is another area that you've got to pay attention to if you plan to be working in Italy. Pay attention to contracts. Some companies here in Italy will give you a contract which has quite a low amount of money on it, and they'll pay you the rest in so-called black money. Untaxed money, completely illegal, but it happens. Now, you've got to think about this, because as much as you might be grateful for the job in that moment and for having a contract, you've got to consider that the amount of money on your contract is going to decide whether or not in the future you're able to take out a mortgage, get a loan, have credit for anything. So it could have like long-lasting implications for you. So you must be careful with that. It's not a route that I would recommend. Now, also, you might be asked by your company to open a partita IVA. Now, this happens typically with private schools here in Italy when you teach English. But you've got to be careful with this. I got stung with this because I did this very thing until I realised that I perhaps shouldn't have done, because if you work for a school as if you have a contract, in the sense that you have regular hours, you have regular lessons, you do have a similar pattern, a timetable every single week, and you don't have any flexibility, like you can't just say one day, I'm not available to do this lesson, they should be issuing you a contract, not a partita IVA. A partita IVA is like you working as a freelancer, as a self-employed person, which means that you have a lot more freedom and jurisdiction over the hours that you work. So be careful with that. Like companies make you do this because it gives the company less responsibility and less things that they have to pay for. So really, really pay attention to that as well. Now, telephone calls. I've got to be honest with you, the moment I got an Italian phone number, it was like the floodgates opened for all of the spam calls. I do not remember it being as bad as this in the UK. I think there's better regulation in the UK for spam calls. But honestly, here in Italy, it's like all the time. I even put my number on a database that is supposed to stop this from happening. And as much as I did notice a reduction for some time, the calls have restarted again. So it's a real problem, but you've got to be careful because some of these telephone calls that you receive are scams. Never, ever, ever say sì in a telephone call. So when you answer the telephone in Italy, we typically go pronto. And then you'll typically hear the call operator be like, are you so-and-so? Okay, so they'll repeat the name back. Whatever you do, don't say sì, say chi è? Who is this, right? Because if you say C, there is a scam at the moment where your voice is being recorded, and that C can be used to mean that you agreed to a particular service. So you have to be really, really careful. Don't give too much information away. Something that I cannot understand is that some people I know here, when they receive a telephone call from these call centres, rather than immediately just being like, non grazie, buona giornata, ciao, they engage in a conversation. Oh, no, it's okay. I have this service. It's okay. I don't need this. No, it's okay. Thank you for your time. Blah, blah, blah. Don't give any information away. You never know what details are being taken from you to profile you, okay? If it doesn't interest you, if you're not interested, just close the call. Don't engage in conversation because sometimes we give more information away than we intended to, and it could be used against us in future. Now, you have to be careful because I had a situation and it was actually by email and it was for a utility company because often it's utility companies that get targeted with these kinds of scams. And it was for a big utility company in Italy. It was a few years ago now. And basically they sent an email telling me that I owed money on an old account for a property that I used to live in. And I thought that was really strange because I'm really, really precise with my payments. Anyway, they seemed really, really convincing. I have to be honest with you. I had the email, they sent me this document, etc., etc. And I was like, but I'm not sure about this. They were really pushing. And when I called this office, they answered the telephone as if they were at the beach. Like it wasn't like with any sense of professionalism, right? So I decided to go in person to one of the shops that they have here in Italy for this particular energy provider and actually ask them in person, did I owe this company any money? And they were like, no, we have this scam at the moment going around where people are pretending that they are from our company and that you owe us money. It is not real. Imagine. And so many people fall victim to this. There are so many scams. I read about it all the time in the local newspapers of elderly people in particular receiving telephone calls from family members saying that their family member needs money or needs something. There's an emergency. Just be so, so careful, okay? I have to be honest with you now. I don't answer the telephone for any numbers that I don't recognise immediately, especially because some of these call centres actually buy international numbers. So like I had some telephone numbers the other day from like Austria, from Germany, even from the UK. I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. So for this, just be really, really mindful that this happens here. And then finally, I want to touch on websites. Now, this is something that I encountered recently when I was searching for some different business services that I needed. Not every website here is genuine. Pay particular attention to this. I think you can usually tell with a website if it's genuine or not, just from the feel of it, how it looks. Does it look like it's just been put together with the use of AI or stock images, whatever it may be? But some key giveaways are, does the company have a partita IVA number if they are selling you something, for example? Also, I would say to you as well, are there any up-to-date contact details? Do you have social links that work? Can you click on those social links? Do they take you anywhere? Also, like the about page, is there a photo of the founder? Is there any information that you can glean other than just a generalized statement? Are there any reviews? Trustpilot is a great place for you to refer to if you need to check any reviews of companies and services. Always pay attention to the number of reviews though. If there are only a couple, like 5 or less than 10, usually that's just the employees of that company or friends. So make sure that you really look into that and try to go to a few different sources. But just pay attention to these things. Not every website is legitimate. One of the services that I was looking into recently, I had 3 websites came up, all with the same name. I did not know which one was real. Like, I was clicking through and it was incredible because they all looked really strange and dodgy. But it was just so weird because it all had the same business name, but they had different domains. And then I couldn't find any contact details that actually correlated. None of the social links worked. So a lot of red flags. So just be really careful. There are websites here that are not genuine and can rip you off. So just make sure that you do your research. And this concludes my little video to show you some of the things that can happen here in Italy, some of the scams. There are loads more. This is just a summary, but I hope it's educated you enough to realise that you've got to have your eyes wide open when you're living here. And if you want to keep yourself informed of life in Italy and also connect with other people who are moving here and living here, check out my Aperitivo Lounge community. This space is thriving. People are making connections. We've already had our first live Aperitivo hour call and it was lovely to hear people's stories. It's just a great place. So go check that out. And also, check out this video here because this video is going to give you another insight into what you need to think about when you're planning to move to Italy. I will see you in the next video.